All right, welcome back to Racial Reconciliation, Christians and Racial Reconciliation. This one here is not going to so much be about racial reconciliation, but it is a side topic concerning a good question that I got online from a friend questioning this. How is the question of racial injustice related to our pro-life stance? And this is near and dear to my heart, and here's the reason why. I think that crucially, the question of racial injustice and pro-life justice is intimately related. Let me tell you why that's the case, and let me tell you a conversation that I had in the last few days on this topic and how I think it helps bring the importance of this to the forefront. The issue of injustice, racial injustice, is one of the few things that is uncritically morally accepted as a good by those people who are not Christians in our society. All right, it is uncritically welcomed and recognized as a good. Now, since that's the case, what we have here is a temptation to run away from that because so many unchristian people or non-Christian people or people who are not careful Orthodox Christians, they run from that issue, or we run from that issue because so many people accept it who are not what we are. And I think this is a crucial importance. Instead of that, if you are interested in cultural engagement for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of pressing the claims of Christ on our culture, this is very valuable. That kind of territory is valuable ground and should be fought for. Let me explain what I mean. So, yesterday, I had an interaction with a musician in Oklahoma City on Twitter. He's a guy I follow. He's absolutely liberal. We would disagree on so many things. It's not even funny. However, he's in my city and people follow him, so I follow him, all right? And he commented on a political status by a political representative and questioning the association that this representative was making between abortion and the Second Amendment, all right? He was connecting those two together. And he said to that person, in reply to them, this is a monumental false equivalency. He said, as an elected leader, an official, I would expect you to know the difference. It's not your body to regulate. Sit down and learn to listen. Okay? So I responded and said, you're right. That's not the same thing. And by the way, it's not. The Second Amendment is an inanimate object, rights about an inanimate object, and connected to now, don't get me wrong, I'm pro-Second Amendment, okay? I own guns and I shoot them and teach my kids and wife to do the same thing, all right? However, it's not the same thing. We don't want to create that false equivalency. So I recognized the false equivalency, and then I said, but the level of systemic injustice toward the unborn is staggering. And that's not a false equivalency. Both kinds of systemic oppression should be fought. He replied and said, that's a toxic political move to compare those two. I would suppose that the systemic injustice toward the living far outweighs that of the unborn. The common pro-life approach too often values the life of the fetus over the life and freedom of the person carrying the fetus. And I replied and said, I don't think it is toxic. I think the parallels are stunning. Now, listen, this is very important. We move this topic because we are arguing over common moral ground we agree about. And that's very important. Here's what we don't agree about: the personhood of the baby. But we're arguing over moral ground that is common moral ground. So, I said, this all hinges on the definition of person, similar to what the wrongly decided court cases did in racial issues. And by the way, this is part of your history you should learn, right? The 3/5 compromise. The 3/5 compromise was a compromise between northern and southern states. The northern states believed that slaves, black people, were people. They were humans, and they should be fought for and believed in and counted as human. The southern states did not believe they were human and should not be counted and fought for. Until it came to the question of political influence. When the South wanted more representatives and more states, they wanted more power and influence in government. They wanted to count the slaves as humans. So they wanted all the slaves to be counted in their population so they could have more representatives in government. And the North wanted to dehumanize the slaves and not count them so the South would have less political influence in the legislature. Now, do you see how both sides were playing hypocrisy? They were only counting them when it was useful. And I said, in that tweet my reply to him, I said, Dred Scott, the 3/5 decision, etc., all of those gave freedom to dehumanize to people who had power. Now, at this point, another guy who is a person on Twitter who's a liberal and has, all the things that go along with that, replied and said, no, pro-choice is not systemic oppression. Addressing that oppression would look far closer at the circumstances that led to the abortion, quality of life of the mother, lack of support, education, economic status, versus the ball of cells that is a potential person. Okay. Now again, we're hinging on the issue, we're arguing about the issue of personhood, but we're arguing on moral ground that I claim as our ground. I said, what I'm saying is that it is oppressive to the unborn child. As regarding this unborn, you are speaking from a position of power. I'm just as interested as you are as making sure that systemic oppression racially is eliminated, but this is all about whether we dehumanize unborn babies. And he replied and said, look, unborn babies aren't humans, but we'll just have to agree to disagree. And I said, I know that we are going to have to disagree. That's the ultimate disagreement. I know we're at an impasse, and I'm okay with that. But current law and jurisprudence gives the lie to the idea that unborn is what makes babies less than human. Listen, this is a crucial point. Unborn is not what makes babies less than human. I.e., I said, it's murder and manslaughter if you kill the baby of a pregnant woman. Listen, we're arguing on ground that we own, that I'm claiming that ground as ours for the sake of the moral argument that I need to make. And I said, thus what makes babies human before the law is, this is so important, wantedness. Okay? Wantedness. That is what makes babies human before the law. If that's not eerily similar to the 3/5 compromise, if that's not eerily similar to that place where both North and South states wanted to call slaves human when it was convenient for them, in other words, when they're wanted, they count, and when they're not wanted, they don't count. And I said, that's just wrong. Now listen, he came back and said, that parallel is a reframing for me, and I should never walk away from gaining insight to another perspective as a loss. What kind of human would I be? You know the best part of having a civil conversation, he said, you always learn and grow, and you fail, you stop seeing the other person you're talking to as other. This is how we're going to change the world. Thanks. Now, we didn't come to agreement, but we argued on moral ground that Christians should own. We should own that ground. We should step into that ground fearlessly and say, this ground is gospel ground, and argue from a shared moral perspective. So now here's the thing. If we're going to do that, we need to step fearlessly into the area of racial injustice. We need to step fearlessly into that area and be willing to say Black Lives Matter. You know why Black Lives Matter? Because they're underrepresented in the conversation in many places and often not recognized. And you know why unborn lives matter? Because they're not represented in many places. And they're dehumanized, and they're only treated as wanted when they're convenient. And that's what makes them human. And it's not true, right? We need that common moral philosophical framework. We need that common moral ground so that we can fight for what is true and right and gospel. All right? Let's do it. God bless you. By the way, thanks, Jody, for the question. And we'll look forward to talking more about these things as we move forward. God bless. See you next time.